Давайте сделаем еще вот какую маленькую вещь. Пожалуйста, постарайтесь сидеть по двое, или вот, по-моему, есть один человек, как бы третий. Постарайтесь как-нибудь объединиться, потому что раздаточного материала не очень много. Я надеюсь, что хватит 7, раз, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Ну вот хватит совсем впритык. Поэтому выдавать буду вот один лист, 4 руки. Okay, we are beginning our course of lectures. Now, these are really lectures, not just nice talking. I'll be mostly talking in English, but whenever anything is not clear, whenever you haven't caught anything, не уловили, or didn't understand anything, don't be shy to ask. Не стесняйтесь спрашивать. That's what we are here for. To understand, to know. In case of need, I'll be writing things on the blackboard. And the title of our first lecture is there in the list. It is in Russian. Британский плавильный котел. Or in English, the British melting pot. I won't write it on the blackboard. I think you can do it yourself. Maybe you have already heard this expression, melting pot. Melting pot, плавильный котел, connected with America, because waves of immigrants came to America, making the American nation. But the same thing happened to Britain only a long, long time ago, many thousand years ago. As I'll be talking of rather special things of history, a little bit about archaeology, archaeologia. Of course, there will be some words that you are not supposed to know. Же не предполагается, что вы их знаете, that you can't know so far, пока еще. That's why I try to help you. I'll give you lists of vocabulary, of special vocabulary that I'll be using. Here is the first. These are just words that I'll be using, special words. These are proper names. Here you are. You see, I can't move very freely. These are for the girls there. Will you please distribute these? These are for you. One for two. ST for two. But will you look through the words? I think that some of them you know quite well, such as bronze, iron, maybe others, chief. But to make it easier for you, I'll provide you also with the same words subdivided into several topics, подразделенные на несколько тем. Лексика будет по темам. So, again, here you are. The words are the same. So, of course, we shall talk about war. It's natural when there are so many tribes with different customs, different ways of life, с разными стилями жизни. Tell me, what words in the part war are unknown to you, незнакомые? Dagger, кинжал. Кинжал в средневековье, and in earlier times just нож. Anything else? I think axe, sword, shield, these are more or less okay, aren't they? Armor, what's the Russian for armor? Если бы у нас было время, я бы просто эти листочки раздала вам заранее и попросила бы дома заполнить вот строчки, оставленные для перевода. Но, увы, armor, броня, доспехи. What is a chariot? Great. Then some rather unpleasant verbs. To murder means to rape. Насиловать, well, it's history. I'm sorry. To win, to lose, I think it's clear. To conquer, to defeat. Побеждать, наносить поражение. To surrender, that is сдаваться кому-то. Warrior, I think you know this word. And as to a hostage, that is заложник, just great. Then in power and state, власть и государство. Though we shall talk today only about the beginnings of the state, but we shall talk a lot about power. I think that tribe, the empire, the province, it's all clear. Chief, emperor, governor. As to client, king, I'll talk about it when we come closer to it. And I think the description will make you understand what is meant here. A slave, that is a traitor, treason, предатель. Treason, предательство. And the victim, that is he who suffers, жертва. Then farming. Do you know these words from farming? What is oats? Oats, овес. Rye, catcher in the rye. Рожь, натурально. Wheat, наоборот, пшеница. And barley, ячмень. And in crafts, well, these are names of material. Flint is кремень. Flint is the first that we shall mention. And don't hurry writing these down. If you have any problems, don't be shy to ask. And then some things that can be made. These are materials. These are things made from these materials. Pottery, that is... молодых людей я бы, в общем, от них многого не ждала. Вам-то надо знать. Pottery, керамика. Глиняная посуда. Vessel, that is сосуд. Кроме того, иногда использовал в смысле корабль, но нам интереснее это сейчас как сосуд. Brooch, that is a брошь. Bracelet, I think, is clear. Coin, монета. And some words concerning religion. Well, with religion, I think everything is clear to you. If something is not, then just ask me. Here you are. Any questions? All right. So, as you can see from the name of the topic, we shall begin to talk about the history of Britain somewhere 7,000 years before Christ. What's the version for before Christ? До нашей эры. Просто разные обозначения. Before Christ, that is BC. That's the abbreviation they use. And нашей эры, какая аббревиатура? AD, that is Anno Domini. Great. It's nice to deal with cultured people. So, of course, it's not a very exact date, не очень-то точная. But I think that we can talk about the history of the British Isles, just as a unity, как нечто единое, more or less since that date. Can you guess why? Why did I use this time to begin my lecture with? Почему именно с этой даты мы начинаем? Any ideas? Why it's since then that we can talk about the history of Britain, of the British Isles? Just because it was then, or almost then, that the British Isles became the Isles, that is islands. Because for a long, long time, what we know now as Britain was part of the continent. I see nothing new in this information. I'm sorry, I don't have the great device which is called epidioscope. I had it last time, but we don't have it now. So I have to show you all the pictures, and there will be many, just like this. Then I think I'll give them to you, and you can have a closer look. Посмотрите поближе. The same order, the picture that everybody has looked at will go to the back desk and wait there for me. So here is the first picture. It's the time just after the ice. Most part of Europe is still covered with frozen water. That is so-called ice sheets. What's the Russian for ice sheet? Ледник. Europe, parts of France, and of course what we know now as Britain. Then about, well, I think you can see it yourself, about 18,000 years BC, примерно 18 тысячелетий до Рождества Христова, about the time the climate grew warmer, the ice began to melt. It was melting slowly but surely, медленно верно. Of course, with the ice melting, there were appearing new rivers, new valleys, долины. The coastline was changing, береговая линия. Then, about 14,000 years ago, what we know now, то, что нам сейчас известно as British Isles, began separating from the continent. Some rivers became deeper. There was a river where now we have British Channel, English Channel, sorry, or La Manche. So the isles began to separate. And the process went on and on till about 7,000 years ago, years before Christ, sorry. Так что на самом деле 9 примерно тысяч. The British Isles have separated for good, навсегда. Since then, we begin the history of the British Isles well apart from the continent, отдельно. Here they are. You can have a look at the pictures. I think I'll be giving one picture here, one there. It will find you someday. Well, what kind of population could be there on the British Isles? What do you think? Oh, be brave. Who could live there at the time? Let's begin with animals. What animals could separate from the continent together with the land they were living on? Mammoths, for sure. Who else? Hippos. What's a hippo? Hippopotamuses. That is, there was a time when Britain was populated with hippopotamuses. Just imagine. Of course, there were tigers and there were some smaller creatures. As well, there were men. They were called old stone men. Как бы старый или ранний каменный человек. We know very little about them. We know that they were a little brighter than the monkeys already. They were using stone axes. Also, they were beginning to use tools. What's the Russian for tools? Tools were mostly made of what? Of flint, creaming, of flint, and of course of the bones of animals they hunted for. In the Bell's History of England, which we'll be using a little, there are some pictures of these flint daggers and tools. Кремневые наконечники, ножи. You'll see them because you'll have these books at home. Please be careful. But of course, the closer to our time, the more we know about their population. So for about 4,000 or 5,000 years, the life on the British Isles was rather quiet and peaceful. But then the first wave of immigrants, первая волна иммигрантов, came to the islands. Tell me, how wide is the English Channel, approximately?
21 miles.
21 miles. How much in kilometers? About 32 or 33. Not so much. You can cross it in a rubber boat, can't you? В резиновой лодке. So it's not surprising that people from the continent got interested in the British Isles, which they could see from the continent in good clear weather, just as we can see now. They started to immigrate to the British Isles, то есть въезжать на острова. Well, this was the time of so-called Neolithic age, век неолита. And the people were called the old stone men. The first wave of immigrants came from the continent about 6,000 years BC, примерно за 6 тысячелетий до Рождества Христова. They were more... Успеваем? Well, you mustn't take notes, only if you want. They were, of course, more cultured than the old stone men. With them, they brought some cattle, привезли с собой скот. They could grow and gather harvests or crops, урожаи, and they were using stone axes, different tools. They were also quite good in making pottery. Уже умели делать керамику. Of course, they differed very much from the tribes which populated Great Britain before them. These tribes were not farmers. They knew nothing about farming, they were hunters. So, they were roaming the isles, вот шатались, бродили туда-сюда, living on the animals they could hunt, fish they could catch, and some fruit or maybe roots, коренья, that they could dig from the ground or gather from the trees. The immigrants were more cultured, and every time that new immigrants came to the British Isles, they brought a higher level of culture with them. Приносили с собой более высокий культурный уровень развития. So, well, immigrants were a good thing in British history. Well, these were the first, and as somebody has already said here quite correctly, these were Iberians. I'm not writing the name on the blackboard because it is there. You see, tribes or peoples, meaning народы, not люди. These were Iberians. The first Iberians came to Britain about 3,000 years before Christ. Примерно за 3000 лет до Рождества Христова. Presumably, предположительно, they came from Spain. So one of the first countries, so to say, ну, так сказать, конечно, стран. One of the first countries that have influenced British history was Spain. Spain, the native country of the Iberians, которые у нас называются когда иберийцы, а когда иберианцы. Иберийцы, более устоявшееся название. That was 3,000 years before Christ. Then, 2,000 years before Christ, the changes were slow at that time. Перемены были очень медленными. So-called beaker people came to Britain. Beaker is the name of the vessel that they could make. I haven't found the Russian equivalent of this term in our books, so I can only give you my variant. I think that we can translate beaker as горшок, and beaker people or beaker folk are горшечники. They were, presumably, опять-таки предположительно, the first who brought to the British Isles the art of making pottery, искусство создания керамики. Also, the beaker people knew how to work with bronze, which was also very valuable, ценно. And strictly speaking, with them, that is 2,000 years BC, the Bronze Age came to Britain. A little later, then it began on the continent. As to the beaker people, we can learn some facts about them, of course, from archaeology. Please tell me, what's the best thing in the world for an archaeologist? Что археолог любит больше всего? Three guesses, три догадки. Graves, могилы. That's the best source, источник of our knowledge about ancient people. So, beaker people, beaker folk, were burying their dead with a lot of presents, well, for them to use in their next life. And besides tools and weapons, what's Russian weapons? That is axes, shields, daggers. They were also putting in these graves their beakers. Вот эти вот самые горшки, сосуды. Beaker is a red clay vessel. Сосуд из красной глины. But they were mostly famous for their decorations. Beaker people were quite artistic people. They were thinking not only about the use, о пользе, but also about beauty. Here are some pictures of their beakers. You'll be able to have a closer look at them. Just imagine that the technology of making these decorations, вот этих украшений, was the following. When the beaker was still wet, влажный, wet and rather soft, they were putting wet cords on it, веревки мокрые. They were putting these cords in different kinds of ornament and pressing them into the beaker's side. Вот, прижимать к боку, very carefully, not to spoil the shape. And when the beaker was beginning to get dry, the cord was taken away, and here were the imprints, отпечатки. Do you understand the technology of that? Well, here they are. I think it will be fair to begin here now. These are the decorations. Well, there are some scientists who don't agree that beaker people were that early. They say that in the graves, well, the people's skulls, черепа, are rounder than were the heads of the population of Britain of that time. So there are some scientists who say that there were no bigger people at all. I think for us it's not a question of great matter. Were there bigger people or they weren't? At least there were some people who brought the art of making beautiful pottery to Britain and who brought bronze. That's what's important for us. Then these waves of immigrants, волны иммигрантов, were coming closer and closer in time. Everything was speeding up. Все ускорялось. After the bigger people, remember 2000 years BC, the next tribes began to invade Britain. These were Scots and Picts. Скотты и Пикты. And you shouldn't think that the ancient Scots were just the ancestors of today's Scotsmen or Scottish. There were many transformations, intermarrying, intermingling, там, перекрестных браков, всяческого перемешивания. So the Scots of these times are rather far from the population of today's Scotland. I don't know where is the evidence, вот где тому свидетельство, but in one of the books I found the following fact, that about 1500 years BC, знаете, да, как обычно называют такие даты, 1500 years, 1500 лет до Рождества Христова, the population of Britain was about 1 million. As the English people say, says who, как бы кто так сказал, I don't know who says that, but that's what was said, 1 million. Well, let's believe that. And then new immigrants were coming to Britain. They were not only farmers as the Iberians, they were not only pottery makers as the bigger people, they were craftsmen. And прежде всего были ремесленники. They were very good at different crafts. Do you know the word craft? C-R-A-F-T, craftsmen. They were using bronze, and by the way, I think you remember that bronze is made of copper. What's copper? And tin. What is tin? Жесть, да, а еще олово. Жесть это уже производная. So bronze was made of copper and tin, and both were found on the British Isles. So they were working in bronze, and about that time, gold was discovered in Ireland. So about 500 years ago, примерно 3,5 тысячелетия назад, they had sort of a gold rush in ancient Ireland. Такая вот золотая лихорадка по-древнеирландски. Naturally, as soon as the news of the gold discovered there reached the continent, new people strolled to Britain, and the Iron Age began. Вот нашли как бы золото, начался железный век. I think it's clear why, because the new immigrants brought iron with them, knowledge of how to work with iron. These people coming to Britain were not only craftsmen, they were also warriors, воины, and traders, торговцы, and builders. So they were equally good in war, trade, crafts, and building. And they were the Celts. By the way, слово Celts читается вот именно так и пишется именно так против всех правил. Ведь по правилам, да, по произнесению «с» это должны бы быть Celts. Но тем не менее, постарайтесь запомнить, начинается с Celts. We can say approximately that the first Celtic tribes came to Britain about 800 years BC, примерно в 8 веке до Рождества Христова. Well, the Celts played a great part in British history, so we shall talk about them in more details. First, please tell me, who in modern Britain think of themselves as the direct descendants, вот прямые наследники, прямые потомки of the Celts? Who is very proud of their Celtic blood? People in Wales, and people in Ireland, of course. That's why, well, not that's why, but because in Wales and in Ireland, Celtic language was more or less preserved, в большей или меньшей степени сохранился. That is the Gaelic language, гельский или гаэльский, как иногда пишут. The language they were talking in Wales before they all adopted English were the closest to the Celtic language. So they're very proud of themselves. They say that they're the real and the only Celts in this world. Вот валлийцы и ирландцы. Как вы понимаете, на пользу их характеру это не идет. Well, as to the Celts, as I told you, with them the Iron Age came to Britain. With them they brought iron, first in the form of weapon. In battles they were using iron swords and iron daggers. Вот здесь вот daggers уже, пожалуй, разумнее переводить как кинжалы. And what is a sword? Конечно, в более поздние времена, в времена куртуазные, это шпага. Но пока что и на весь сегодняшний день для нас с вами sword – это только меч. So the Celts were fighting with iron swords and daggers. Any questions? Dagger, кинжал. Пока мы говорили о кремневых, это скорее были ножи. Когда заговорили о железных, это все-таки уже кинжалы. Well, where did the Celts come from? First, they came from France, also from Belgium, and from the southern Germany. These are the first territories occupied by the Celts. They came to Britain trying to escape. What's the Russian for to escape? Удрать, забежать. To escape from more warlike tribes, warlike воинственные. Or using the Latin word bellicose, от bellum, война, bellum, опять-таки воинственные, любящие войну. They were escaping from the warlike tribes of the continent, which means that these Celts were rather peaceful people, in spite of their iron swords and daggers, несмотря на. First, it's them whom we can thank for the word Albion. Albion is a Celtic word, one of the names of Great Britain. There are many of them, I think, as you know. Then, the first castles in Great Britain were also built by the Celts. Of course, when I say castle, замок, we shouldn't think of castles that can be found in Britain now, or even of the castles I'll be showing you in pictures when we'll speak about the Normans. Это не нормандские замки. Strictly speaking, these castles in the time we're speaking about, that is the 8th, the 7th, the 6th centuries before Christ, are just Neolithic settlements, просто неолитические поселения. And the oldest of them is Cadbury. I'm not writing the word on the blackboard because you have seen it dozens of times on chocolate bars. So whenever you have a Cadbury chocolate bar in your hand, just remember that it's not only chocolate with nuts or without. It also means about 40 ages of history, примерно 40 веков. Помните Наполеона, да? Солдаты 40 веков смотрят на вас с пирамид. Так вот 40 веков смотрят на вас с каждой шоколадки Cadbury. Cadbury was one of the first of Neolithic settlements called castles, though they were not, strictly speaking, castles. The Celts were not only warriors and traders and builders, they were very good farmers. So it's due to them, благодаря им, such agricultural things as oats, rye, wheat and barley came to Britain. Да, я прошу прощения, у вас в списках слов туда вкралась опечатка, конечно же, barley, а не parley. I'm awfully sorry. I think that's why your hesitation, поэтому вы и заколебались несколько в определении этого слова. Barley. That is овес, рожь, пшеница и ячмень. Well, oats and wheat and rye were used to make bread. As to barley, it was very important in the life of the Britons because the famous mead was made from barley. Mead – это вот тот самый медовый напиток. Помните стивенсовское стихотворение про малюток-медоваров? Есть там некоторый анахронизм. Кроме того, он их, по-моему, называет пиктами. Вот большой вопрос, были ли они пикты или скоты, хотя там поминается король шотландский. Но в те времена пикты, скоты и прочие были перемешаны в значительной степени. Но вот это тот самый напиток, о котором ведет он речь. There is no word mead in your list, so I write it here. Sorry. Mead. It was an alcoholic drink, rather strong one, made of water and honey. Water and fermented honey, ферментированный мед, то есть перебродивший. So barley was used for that mead, which is the ancestor, предок of the modern beer and other drinks. Well, we can say some words about we have some information about the Celts. First of all, due to the Greek and Roman chronologists, historians. One of them was Herodotus, an ancient Greek historian. He wrote that in the 5th century BC, до Рождества Христова, the Phoenicians, which is финикийцы, who were famous travelers and traders, used to come to the British Isles, remember, used to come, имели обыкновение приплывать, for tin, which is tin, олово. It was dug there, добывалось там. This tin was used, as I've already told you, in making bronze, and the Phoenicians called the British Isles the Tin Isles. So one more name for the same country. Celtic Albion, Кельтский Альбион, финикийское название Оловянные острова, Tin Islands. We also have some information about the Celts from Julius Caesar's memories or notes about Gallic wars. Strictly speaking, commentaries on the Gallic War, комментарии о Гальской войне. The book was written in the 1st century BC, and quite a lot is written about the Celts there. Потому что кельты, галлы, в общем-то, это одно семейство. Помните, кельты пришли в том числе из Франции, из Бельгии, из Франции, немножко из Германии. These are our sources of knowledge about the Celts, наши источники знаний о них. And the tribes we'll be talking about next were also of Celtic origin, тоже кельтского происхождения. That is the Britons, бриты. In English it is Britons, and we call them usually Briti, double T. And then the Belgi, Belgs or Belge. They were all Celts. So very quickly remember the first Iberians, after the Old Stone Men, Iberians, Beaker folk, and then Celts, and different Celtic people. As to the Britons, a name of a Celtic tribe, they could make things of iron, bronze, tin, clay, wood, and, which is rather interesting for us, of coral and animal. What's coral? Coral and animal? Emali. So they were also making not only weapons and tools, but decorations and objects of art. So the Britons were rather artistic people. Almost always making a sword or a shield or, well, a dagger, they were decorating it. And in the graves of ancient Britons, в могилах, besides weapons and tools, also bracelets, brooches, mirrors are found. All of them beautifully decorated. Also, they coined money. Coined, to coin, чеканили. They coined money of gold and silver. And for their trading, they also used bars of iron. What's the Russian for bar? Только что было bar of chocolate. Ну, как бы, да, плитки, слитки такие небольшие, bars of iron. So they were paying and buying things with coins of gold and silver and bars of iron. So much for the Britons. The most civilized of all of them were the Britons in the south, in the southern eastern part of Britain. I'm sorry, I don't have the map but I think you can, more or less, remember the map of British Isles. So imagine the southern eastern part, юго-восточная часть. Представляете, да? То есть вот самые такие знакомые края, там, где сейчас Лондон, Йорк, Кентербери и прочее. There the British were the most civilized. Also they were the closest to the continent. And of course the cultural relationship between Britain and the continent was mostly made there. Основные культурные связи осуществлялись именно там. We can approximately, приблизительно, пока еще все очень приблизительно, date the Britain's arrival to Great Britain as 400 years BC. Примерно 400 лет до Рождества Христова. The Celts began coming 800 years BC, the Britons, one of Celtic tribes, about 400 years BC. The process was going quicker and quicker. Как я предупреждала, процесс эмиграции, изменения культуры, он все ускорялся и ускорялся. So, only 300 years passed, and about 100 years BC, that is at the very beginning of the 1st century BC, another wave of immigrants came to the British Isles. These were the Belgs, Belgi. There they are. They were also of Celtic origin, тоже кельтского происхождения, but they were the most warlike, the most bellicose, и самые воинственные of all the Celts ever invading Britain, the Belgs. And well, when we were speaking about Celts, Britain, Beaker folk, Iberians, we were mostly talking about what they brought to Britain. Farming, weapons, tools, decorations. With the Belgs, we can speak about some names. You see, I can't mention any Britain's kings to you, any Celtic chiefs, вожди, but with Belgs some names are known to us. One of them is the king, well, Cassivellaunus. Мы сделаем вот какую вещь. Все эти имена, excuse my Russian, just for a minute, дошли до нас, конечно, через римские источники. Ну, единственный народ, тогда владевший письменностью на Британских островах. Но если вот эту вот романизированную форму я буду еще и англизировать, как, в общем-то, надо, я боюсь, что мы совсем не разберемся. Поэтому, если позволите, я буду вставлять романизированный вариант вот этих вот кельтских, британских и прочих имен, ну, как бы с русским произношением. Англизировать я их уже не буду. Ладно? Так что вместо Cassivellaunus, пусть все-таки он будет у вас записан так, как пишется обычно в учебниках. Cassivellaunus. Явная романизация этого имени, да? So, Cassivellaunus was one of Belg's kings. He was a very powerful king, and he is especially interesting for us because he was the uncle of another king whose name was Cunobellinus. And this Cunobellinus is the very Cymbeline from Shakespeare's play. Помните шекспировскую пьесу «Цимбелин»? Вот это про того самого бельгийского короля Cunobellinusa, племянника Cassivellaunus'а. We shall talk about Cunobellinus a little more. Only try to remember that he was ruling, his residence was in what we now call Colchester, what the Romans were calling Camulodunum. Well, the Romans usually were trying to present, представить British tribes as barbarians. Well, it's natural when you come to a country trying to conquer it. Of course, you try to make the world believe, заставить их поверить, that the native tribes are just barbarians, well, if not just monkeys. But the British in the 1st century BC were not barbarians. First, they were very skillful people, as I've already told you. They were artistic people. Remember all the decorations, all the jewelry, драгоценности. Also, these kings, Cassivellaunus, Cunobellinus, they were good administrators. Also, they were patronizing arts. Они всячески покровительствовали искусству. At their courts, при дворах, there were artists, singers, well, not writers, not yet, пока еще нет. And they were also good warriors. So when Rome tried to conquer Britain, they did it, but it took them a lot of time and a lot of pains. Очень больших трудов стоило. I think that here I will be through with the waves of immigrants. На некоторое время оставим вот этот вот предмет иммигрантов, наводнивших английские острова. The next wave of newcomers were the Romans. Но называть их иммигрантами можно только в очень особом смысле слова, and we'll return to that. It will be the topic of our next lecture, today's lecture, Roman Britain, that the Roman invasion to Britain and Roman rule of Britain. But so far we are through with the immigrants. And from now on, отныне, they are not immigrants anymore, they are the population of the British Isles, consisting of, help me, Iberians, then Beaker folk, Scots and Picts, and a lot of different Celts, among them the Britons, the Belgs, and others. Now I think we shall talk a little about what is left in Britain from these times. If you take any guide, Great Britain or even in London, there will be for sure, наверняка, one site, one picture in every one of them, в каждом. This is the monument of that epoch. Can you guess which one? What am I talking about? Значит, в любом гайде, в любой книжке по Великобритании обязательно будет изображение одного места, одной местности, одного сооружения, которое является памятником как раз вот древней британской культуры. Any ideas? Before I show you the picture. As soon as I show you the picture, you all will know it. Представьте себе, что это может быть. Вот в каждом из этих. Well, okay, I think you know, just you don't remember now. What's this? Stonehenge, sure. What does it mean, Stonehenge? Stone? And as to the henge, nobody knows for sure what it is. It's not exactly a temple, не то чтобы храм. Of course, it's not a church, it's not a building. Henge is just this construction. Вот такая вот конструкция. То есть слово henge – это не имя собственное, это имя нарицательное. And I shall tell you about some henges now. But just to prove that I was saying that I was telling you the truth, что я правду говорила, here is one image of Stonehenge. Here it is. Well, here I have three guides. Have a look. Stonehenge, Stonehenge at daytime. Here one more, Stonehenge. And here are two monuments to British culture. One is Stonehenge, the other, well, Shakespeare's house in Stratford-on-Avon. So you can, I think, understand how British value, how high they estimate this monument. Ну, понятно, да, потому что помещают его в каждый абсолютно путеводитель. И вот здесь вот, самый центр этого путеводителя, шекспировский домик и Стоунхендж. Британцы им очень гордятся. Well, this is the most famous of the monuments of ancient Britain, but the most famous, but not the only one. There were dozens and maybe hundreds of others. One of the oldest henges, many henges, in Britain was found at Avebury. На всякий случай, давайте напишу. The first of them was found at Avebury by a young student of law, такой вот молодой юрист. In the 17th century, he came to his father's farm for vacation, for his holidays, and while walking around his father's farm, he discovered the Everbury henge. Strange as it is, his discovery didn't evoke much interest in Britain at that time. Как-то не возбудило особого интереса. The picture is very small, but well, you can have a close look at it later. Here it is. The remnants, остатки of the henge in Everbury. The remnants, because as I told you, nobody was very interested in it. So in the 19th century, казалось бы, уже культурный век, да, когда многие занимались раскопками прошлого людей, когда Шампольон расшифровал иероглифическое письмо. But in the 19th century, one farmer used some of Everbury stones well, for some repairing of his farm. Maybe he made a pigsty with them. Может быть, он свинарник построил. So he was digging pits, выкапывал ямы, made the fires, разжигал костры, and pushed the stones into these pits. They got hot, and then they easily cracked. Растрескивались. When the great stones were cracked into smaller ones, he was using them at his farm. A vandalistic act, isn't it? So Everbury is only one of them. There were others. For example, well, the stones of Stennis, which I show you in a minute. Камни Stennis, the ring of Brodgar, кольцо Бrodgara, Gallenish stones, и многие другие. I'll show you these pictures in a minute. A few facts about Stonehenge. Do you remember how big are the stones in Stonehenge? Here is one more picture. How high are they? How tall? Nobody remembers. Вот здесь, к сожалению, здесь есть человеческие фигурки, но уж очень маленьких, трудно сравнить. Well, the height, can you see it? The height of stones at Stonehenge is about 8 meters, 8 meters and a half, примерно 8,5 метров. Each of them weighs about 7 tons, примерно 7 тонн. Just imagine that. That's what Stonehenge looked, well, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and it dates approximately to 2200 years BC, примерно 2200 год до нашей эры. Each wave of immigrants coming to Stonehenge got impressed and tried to make some, some rebuilding, some restoring. They were taking away some of the stones, bringing others, usually the bigger ones, and well, erecting them on the grass. Воздвигали там. I think you have all heard, думаю, что все слышали. There are no quarries around Stonehenge. Там нет карьеров. There are no big mountains or big rocks in the vicinity, поблизости. So nobody knows, though there are a lot of guesses, множество догадок и версий, how these great stones, 7 tons each, were brought to Stonehenge. Nobody knows. We all know that when building pyramids, they were used, well, systems of rolls, вот такие вот системы перекатывающихся как бы рельсов. Да? И кроме того, в Египте уже были известны вот эти вот блоки с веревками. Nobody knows how Stonehenge and other henges were built. Scientists are still discussing the ways to do it. Some other monuments of this time I was going to tell you about. These are so-called Callanish stone. They are situated on the Isle of Lewis, на острове Льюис. Это где-то, по-моему, побережье Ирландии. Callanish stones are not so circular as Stonehenge, but of course there is some intricate design. Есть там какой-то сложный рисунок в их расположении. And what is said about them, I'll show it to you in a minute. These Callanish stones have another name in Gaelic. на гальском. I'm not sure how it is pronounced. I think nobody knows how it should be pronounced. It sounds like firbreg, something like that, which means false man. And the legend says that Saint Kieran, Святой Kieran, was trying to convert to Christianity some giants. The giants were rather rude to him. They did not want to become Christian, so the Saint Kieran got angry and turned them to stones. That's why they're called false men, firbreg. Если, конечно, можно поручиться за звучание кельтских слов. And another famous place is the stones of Stanness. I told you about them already. And so-called ring of Brodgar, кольцо Бrodgara. Here there's no picture of it, but we know something about the rituals connected with the ring of Brodgar. The ring of Brodgar has 27 stones in a circle. 27. The stone of Stanness have only 4 stones, but the rituals were quite different. At New Year, the couples wishing to marry, that is пары, собирающиеся вступить в брак, first went to the temple of the moon, в храм Луны, part of this henge, and then to the temple of the stone, making different rituals at both of them, в храме Луны, в храме Солнца, and their marriage was a true thing only when they clasped hands through the hole in the main stone, сквозь отверстие в главном камне, the main stone of the ring of Brodgar. Only after they clasped hands through this hole, their marriage was true in the eyes of the people and of heaven. Also, yes, it was called the stone of Odin. Это был камень Одина, только он мог скрепить их брак. Sick people who were ill with something unpleasant used to walk around the ring of Brodgar 3 times in hopes of getting well. And I think that some of them got well. Otherwise, why should they do it again and again? Well, here you are. These are the Calnish stones. As I told you, there were many others. Of course, now all of them can't be mentioned, but when you are teaching at schools, among a lot of problems, you'll have some rights. Появятся у вас некоторые права. So I highly advise you to become the members of so-called British Council. That is to become the members of the Library of British Council. Most of the books I've been using in preparing this course were taken from there. Not all of them, but most of them. And there is, for example, a very interesting edition which is called the Atlas of Magical Britain, Atlas Магической Британии, where all these monuments are mentioned. Там их множество. Там есть и кольцо Девы, куда допускались только девушки для совершения своих каких-то ритуалов, и колодец 3 ведьм, и Бог знает, что еще. It's easier to go and take this book and have a good look at it. So much for the henges. Another source of our knowledge about the Celts, of course, is mythology. And Celtic mythology... Tired? В столе. Да, простите, пожалуйста, мы как-то говорили об этом с кем-то и, не договорились со всеми. Ну так уж получается. Мы с вами устраиваем пару. 2 занятия по 40 минут, потом 20-минутный перерыв. Excuse me, I didn't warn you beforehand. Как-то не предупредила заранее, sorry. As to Celtic mythology, originally Celtic, of course we can't read it, because the Celts, they had the so-called runic writing, руническое письмо, runic letters, but there are very few people who can read them. But many motives, many elements of Celtic mythology are preserved in Irish mythology. Поэтому вот по любому сборнику ирландских саг и сказаний можно примерно представить себе, как выглядели кельтские сказания. Чуть менее приглаженные, чуть менее цивилизованные. But you know, when I was reading for the first time a book of Irish mythology, I was deeply shocked. I just looked at the contents, содержание, and I saw, ну скажем, разрушение дома Додерга, угон скота у кого-то там, сватовство к Этайн и разрушение дома Этайн и так далее и тому подобное. То есть ровно через слово либо разрушение дома, либо схватка кого-то с кем-то. One of the most famous Irish sagas is called just a minute. Raiding of the cattle of Cooley. Угон скота из Cooley. So, in all the details, it is described who decided to rob their neighbor's cattle, how they did it, and what happened next. И чей дом был разрушен затем. The most famous heroes of the Irish, and they are, strictly speaking, of Celtic origin, are Cuchulainn and Ferdiad, whom we know as Ferdiad. Both were great warriors, but it happened so that they were serving different kings. And once they met each other in a mortal battle, смертельной схватке, which was very hard on both of them because they were both, well, they were friends since their childhood. They were both the pupils of a famous woman, warrior and teacher whose name was, never remembered by heart, Scathach or Scathach. It was a woman warrior who taught them to fight. And the duel of Ferdiad and Cuchulainn, схватка, битва Фердиада и Кухулина, it's one of the most popular motif of many Irish songs, pictures, and sometimes even books. The story was very tragic. If I'm not mistaken, one of them, I can't remember who, it seems to me that it was Ferdiad, he cut off his arm, his right arm, it seems to me, not to conquer his friend. They had to fight against each other, but he didn't want to kill his friend. So he was fighting one-handed. Well, these examples of mythology, Irish mythology, remember, because they had a way to write it down, give us some idea of what the Celtic ways of life were. Cattle was very important for them. That means that they were farmers. They were fighting each other a lot. They were very warlike. They were good at making weapons. They were good at making tools. And also women were very important in Celtic culture. Women teachers, women warriors, women prophets, пророки. So some remnants of matriarchat, какие-то остатки матриархата, were preserved in Celtic culture. I think, it's rather soon that the Roman invasion of the British Isles will begin, and before we talk about the Romans, we should say a few words about Druids. Druids who are closely associated with the Celts. But before telling you about Druids, I would like to show you two more pictures. I'm not sure we can call these monuments of the Celtic culture. These are not monuments, these are just evidence. Не то чтобы памятники, свидетельства. This white horse or white dragon is a phenomenon which is very difficult to explain. The image, образ, изображение, was somehow scratched on the chalk hillside, меловом холме. But how it is possible, nobody knows, because its size is, just a minute, about, well, sorry, I don't remember the exact figure, but this horse is many meters long, maybe some 70 meters, something like that. So it's unimaginable. Невозможно себе представить how could they do it without a possibility to go in the air on an airplane or something and see it from above. How they could keep the perspective. Как можно сохранить такую пропорциональность деталей, как вообще можно держать в уме перспективу такого изображения во столько раз превышающего ваш собственный рост. So the turf Zurn was scratched away, and the chalk side of the hill was showing. It resembles a horse, but there is also a legend that this is the very place where St. George, Святой Георг, the saint patron of Britain, killed the dragon. Well, I think you remember this episode. So this is the place where the dragon was dying and where his poisonous blood, ядовитая кровь, fell to the ground. Nothing can grow. Well, of course, some grass grows there, but every year especially appointed people clear out the outlines of the horse. As to the rituals connected with it, well, in the past centuries, every 7 years the outlines of the horse were cleared. Очертания были так вот восстанавливаемы. And it was accompanied by feasting, пирами, merrymaking, and different sports. For example, here, you see closer to the tail, there is a stream going downwards, такой вот поток. So one of the sports was to throw a big cheese, большую голову сыра, down the stream, and then to compete who will catch it at the bottom. Представляете, да, в такой водопадик небольшой, кинуть голову сыра и затем вот за ней гнаться, кто первого поймает. Here is one, and here is the other. Well, as the audience is mostly female, поскольку аудитория вот почти не смешанная, I think that I can show it to you, well, just because it's beautiful and interesting. It is called just a minute, the John Abbas Giant. Слова John Abbas относятся к истории. Это имя собственное. He is a giant because he is 180 feet tall. The picture is very small. You'll have a closer look at it when you have it. Just imagine that this man is 180 feet tall. В метрах это примерно сколько? 180 футов. На 3 делим. 60 метров. То есть, в общем, это длиннее, ну вот, скажем, здание училища. По-моему, подлиннее. As you can understand from the picture, he was considered as the symbol of virility, мужественности, and of fertility, и плодородия. This figure was the symbol of fertility. So the barren women, бесплодные женщины, used to come and sit on this image, praying to gods for a child. I won't say exactly on what part of the image they sat. I think you can imagine that yourselves. Young girls used to come to his feet and pray there for them not to die old maids, чтобы вот не умереть старыми девами. And many other rituals were observed there. The image is very true to nature, very detailed anatomically. Well, you see it with your own eyes. And now, as to druids. Who were druids? Will you tell me? Will you give me just a little rest and tell me who were druids? Да. Вот насчет племена я бы не согласилась. Вот даже не совсем могу согласиться с отшельниками. Ну, все, что знаете, мы сейчас вот поправим ошибки, если они там будут. Только не племена. Друиды – это, полувыборные, такие вот по наитию занимаемые должности. Монахи не совсем, скорее священники. Священники, священнослужители, жившие в лесах. Да. Друиды исповедовали культ лесов. Даже сейчас появляются все вот эти вот друидические календари. Все это, конечно, очень ширпотребно сделано, но общую идею вывести оттуда можно. The Druids thought of trees and plants as their patrons. They thought about plants as astrologists thought about stars. So they were mostly praying to trees, not to stars. The Druids, they lived and prayed in the woods, especially in sacred oak tree groves. What is an oak tree? Дуб. So they preferred sacred, священные oak tree groves, дубовые рощи. Also, the mistletoe was very important for them. Амела. Вот та самая. The mistletoe which British people hang in their houses at Christmas time. The Druids were believed, that is, про них верили, they were believed to be able to cure people, вылечивать, to give advice, and to foretell the future, предсказывать. And strictly speaking, from what we know about the Druids, they could foretell the future because they were the most, well, not cultured, but the most learned, ученые, the most well-informed people of that time. Usually, they were not only, priests, which now means not so much священники as жрецы. They were not only priests, they were doctors, teachers, and politicians. They could begin a battle and they could stop a battle. Of course, I mean the battles between native people, native tribes, Celts against Celts. They were teachers and doctors. They kept and stored, сохраняли и накапливали the knowledge of the tribe. Well, some of them were women. So we can speak not only about druidic priests, but also about druidic priestesses, о жрицах. And if you get interested in druids and their ways of life, and in the period of, at the very beginning of our millennium, начало нашего тысячелетия, I can recommend you the book which is called in English The Forest House, and in translation Лесная обитель. Лесная обитель. The author is Marion Zimmer Bradley. Marion Zimmer Bradley. Вот это тот случай, когда суперобложка книжку несколько компрометирует. У нее такой вот дешевый бульварный вид. Поэтому, если позволите, супер, мы снимем. Оставим книгу, как она есть. Если кто-то хочет списать, то вот, прошу. Marion Zimmer Bradley is a writer of fantasy and science fiction, mostly. And this can be called fantasy. Знакомый такое жанровое определение fantasy, да? Считается, что вот его родоначальники Толкин, Клайв Стейплс Льюис, Урсула Ле Гуин и другие. This can be called a historical fantasy. Of course, it's not a historical novel. But the information is rather reliable there. На нее вполне можно положиться. Usually, such novels create the atmosphere of the time they're describing very well. So it describes the first century of our time, that is first century AD, the Romans' invasion to Britain and how the Romans and the native British people lived there. Of course, there is a love story, which is the dullest part of the book to my mind. It's a love story between a British girl by the name of Alan and a young Roman officer by the name of Guy, даже не помню как его, Guy Мацели и так далее. The love story is, it's a normal love story. But the atmosphere of the first Roman cities, of druidic temples, храмов, of the forest house, which is the Druids' place, is quite thrilling. I would like to read you some extracts from the book, if you don't mind, okay? In Russian. Remember, just a few minutes ago, I told you that the Druids were not only believed to be able to foretell the future, they could foretell the future. They were good politicians, they were good administrators. Here, Alan, when she is about 16 years old, becomes a druidic priestess. And she's not only a priestess, her great-grandfather, her grandfather by the name of Ardanos, I won't anglizировать this name. He is the archidruid. So when she becomes the priestess, she is the oracle of the temple. Она становится вот таким вот оракулом. То есть как бы через нее, ее устами говорят боги. And very soon she discovers that she, as well as her предшественница by the name of Leonon, they were always instructed by the druids, the men, what to say and how to say to the people. So here is the extra from the book. Готовя себя к церемонии, совершая обряд очищения, Эйлин вдруг подумала, что весь ритуал, наверное, выглядел бы убедительнее и более волнующим, если бы она стала пить из золотой чаши прямо на глазах у собравшегося на праздник народа. Она решила, что поговорит об этом с Арданосом при первой же встрече. Архидруид, казалось, был удивлен, что его внучка способна вообще размышлять о ритуале, но охотно согласился на ее предложение. На этот раз Эйлин сама приготовила снадобье, которое собиралась выпить во время церемонии. При этом она несколько изменила состав настоя. Травы, стимулировавшие способность к ясновидению, она оставила, а те, что лишали ее возможности управлять своими чувствами и ощущениями, она мешать в напиток не стала. Поэтому во время ритуала Эйлин абсолютно ясно слышала и сознавала, какая глубокая тишина опустилась на толпу при ее появлении. Она ощущала благоговение людей, замерших в ожидании чуда. Она была уверена, тем не менее, что когда она сидит на табурете жрицы оракула, дух, говоривший ее устами, существует на самом деле. Она осушила чашу и тут же почувствовала знакомое головокружение. Она погружалась в транс. Помня, как действовало на нее зелье прежде, она опустилась на стул, полуприкрыв веки, и таким образом ей удалось не выдать себя. Арданос не видел ее осознанный взгляд. И на этот раз, внимая заклинанием архидруида, она отчетливо услышала, как он вкрапляет в свою напевную речь совершенно конкретные указания. Было ясно, чего он от нее добивается и зачем. Она слышала, как однажды Арданос сказал, что влияние римской цивилизации сулит британцам большие выгоды. Направляемый мудрой рукой оракул, жрица, может стать могущественным орудием для достижения мира в Британии. И пока Арданос занимает пост архидруида и проводит разумную политику, возможно, ее притворство не такой уж большой грех. Here you are. Well, the translation is far from ideal, but still, that's how Marion Zimmer Bradley sees the situation. She sees the woman prophet, the priestesses, just as the instrument in the arms of the druids, and the druid acting as a politician, as a leader of his people, not only in the religious sense of the word, but in all the others. We can agree with it or disagree, but that's how she sees it. The last thing that I would like to show you and say a few words about before the break, here is a very interesting table of festivals. There are some pagan festivals, языческие праздники, and some Christian festivals happening on the same dates. The most important festivals of ancient or Druidic or Celtic Britain were Beltane and Samhain. Beltane was observed about the 8th of May, the beginning of May. Samhain was at the beginning of November. Beltane was the festival of optimism, symbolized by lighting of the fires between which the animals, the cattle that is, were driven for purification, для очищения. So the cattle was believed not to be sick, to breed well. Что скот не будет болеть, что хорошо будет плодиться. And as to Samhain, it was a festival of the dead, when people from the spirit world became visible for ordinary people, and the border, граница between the real world and the spirit world was rather vague, and people could come from the real world to the spirit world and back. And if you look closely at this table, you will see that almost at the same time as the Celts with the Druids were celebrating Samhain, now we have another festival when well, spirits from the other world appear. That is All Saints Day, or All Souls Day, День всех святых, когда мы как бы находимся под покровительством всех святых, и поэтому мы или англоязычные не боимся, или они не боятся изображать всяческую нечисть, ведьм, гоблинов, черных кошек, скелеты и прочее. Вот этот вот день такого разгула всякой нечистой силы, но под присмотром всех святых. Well, thank you. Now you have a break. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little confused with the absence of bells. You have a break of about well, 20 minutes, maybe 15, not 20. And the music that I'll switch on now will be so-called Celtic harp. Я поставлю музыку кельтской арфы. Это приблизительная реконструкция звучания того инструмента, которым пользовались кельты. Спасибо, передохните. Просто чтобы потом было понятно, кто слышал весь курс, у кого там какие-то пробелы могли оказаться. Скажите мне, пожалуйста, вы нормально воспринимаете, в основном все-таки английскую речь? Без сложностей. Меня немножко пугает то, что вы совершенно не задаете вопросов. Значит ли это, что все понятно, или что просто кто-то стесняется спросить? Не стесняйтесь, пожалуйста, и не забывайте... Начали? Then I'll be mostly speaking English again. But maybe some things I'll be saying in Russian. So the previous lecture, we were talking, I was telling you, about the ancient Britain. And we covered the period from 7,000 years BC up to the very end of our era. We came as close to our times as the 1st century BC. And the music of the Celtic harp could illustrate the относительно relatively peaceful period before the beginning of our era. But everything comes to end, especially peaceful periods in history of different countries. In 55 BC, Julius Caesar, who was not only a great emperor, a general, meaning полководец, and a writer, but also a terribly curious man, made his first expedition to the British Isles. It was 55 BC, Julius Caesar. The name is mentioned there. I think that most of the vocabulary you have already learned, so keep glancing at the list of names, because I'll be using a lot of names from now on. Julius Caesar by then knew quite a lot about the country he called the Gaul, Gallia, which is mostly modern France. But as we remember, the English Channel or La Manche is narrow enough to see the other coast. So one fine day he saw the white rocks of Albion and got interested and organized an expedition. His first expedition was made at the beginning of the campaigning season. То есть начало времени для военных кампаний, which is in spring. Remember, in Roman calendar, the first month of the year was March, because it was the beginning of campaigning season. From the word campaign, военная кампания. He came to Britain in March with only 2 legions, which is not too many people, с 2 легионами. And he sent one of his officers, whose name was, excuse me, my looking for, честно говоря, буду подглядывать, because of lots of names and facts, whose name was Guy Volusinus, или Volusinus. He sent this guy as a scout, как разведчика, to find the best harbor. Maybe Guy was not a good sailor, maybe he wasn't doing his best. He found a harbor, Gavin, for Caesar's ships to land, but it was not the best one. He didn't find the best place to land to Great Britain, which is not far from Ridgeborough. I mean the modern town of Richborough. They landed in another place, less suited for landing, менее подходящим. And the first expedition was not a very successful one for Caesar. There happened a battle, so-called Battle of Deal, название, которое очень нечасто упоминается and, well, is not to be remembered, just if you are interested, Battle of Deal, битва при Диле. Caesar, he defeated the Britons. It was a successful battle for him. And, but after the end of the battle, he pardoned them. Он их простил. He didn't make any avenging expeditions, any avenging raids to the country. Таких мстительных рейдов не устраивал. He pardoned the Britons, but he took hostages. Взял заложников. Some British chiefs. But on the fourth day of Caesar's first stay in England, a terrible storm began. The storm scattered his ships, разметал. As I have already told you, the harbor was not very good, so it was not the best place to keep the fleet. The ships were scattered, and sorry, in all this mess, беспорядке, the English hostages, the British hostages, managed to escape. And what is much worse, it was just several men, but they escaped knowing already how dismayed the soldiers were. Dismayed, в растерянности, в растрепанных чувствах, and how big were the losses that Caesar had. Well, as you can imagine, just as it happened now, if say 3 or 4 of you escaped out of this classroom, I couldn't do much about it, being in dismay. That's exactly what happened with the hostages. They escaped from Caesar's camp, knowing how weak his army was, how unprepared for a battle. Великолепно. Спасибо большое. Thanks. So the next battle was less successful for Caesar, because as I've already told you, his soldiers didn't have a good sleep. They were trying to make reparations to catch the ships scattered in the harbor. And by the way, the Britons in battle were an awful sight. As maybe you have heard, they were using chariots. The chiefs were on two-wheeled, двухколесных chariots, and the soldiers were fighting naked. Naked, that is without any clothes at all. They were wearing long hair, well, I think that long. Just imagine muscular, strong, naked men with long hair dyed blue all over. They were dyeing themselves blue with a special thing which they took from a plant which is called in English woad. А по-русски это называется синиль. Вот такое вот растение, из которого добывается синяя краска, очень стойкая. Woad. So in the next battle, the Britons were quite cheerful. They dyed themselves blue. They surrounded the chariots of their chiefs, and Caesar had to, very soon Caesar had to leave Britain. That was his first expedition to Britain. But as I have already told you, Caesar was a very curious man, curious and power-loving, мустолюбивый. So the next year, in 54 BC, remember they were counting backward, in 54 BC he organized the second expedition to the British Isles. This time he was equipped much better, гораздо лучше собрался. He had 5 legends with him and about 2,000 people in cavalry. Of course, the fleet carrying these 5 legions of infantry, пехоты, and 2,000 people of cavalry, кавалерии, the fleet was great. There were about 800 ships in this fleet, transports and warships, военные корабли и просто транспортные. he came to the British shores at night and took a fortress on the coast, крепость. He took them by surprise. Застал врасплох. It was a fortress in a place called Bigbury, not far from Canterbury, modern Canterbury, of course, Bigbury. But Caesar was unlucky in Great Britain. On the second day of his stay in Britain, after he took the fortress, a storm began. I told you that he was unlucky. All his ships, all the 800 of them, were damaged, seriously damaged. And more than that, the king Cassivellaunus, about whom you have already heard, a very strong king of the Belgov, was chosen by the Britons as their leader. So he gathered the forces and met Caesar in the battle. He won. The first battle, was defeated on the second, but nevertheless Caesar was quite impressed by the Britons. And as some of you could think, the storms, that is bad weather on the sea, for Caesar was the same as the cold weather and frosts for Napoleon and Russia. The same thing. Not a very wise thing to come on a war expedition, on a campaign, when there are storms at sea. So the victory could be on the British side, but one of the, not exactly a king, just one of the political exiles, один из вот таких политических беженцев from some tribe, whose name was Mundebracius или Mundebratius. He was a political exile from his own tribe, so he got to Caesar and told him about some plans of the Britons. That is, he became a traitor. He surrendered to Caesar with the remnants of his tribe, с остатками своего племени, and following his example, some other tribes surrendered. So some British tribes were more afraid of Cassivellaunus than they were even of Caesar, which characterizes the king Cassivellaunus, not in a very nice way. Cassivellaunus was the last to surrender, but just at that time the campaigning season for the Romans ended, and Caesar returned back to Gaul, which is Gallia, that is France. These were the first Roman expeditions or visits to Britain. We can't call them invasions yet, because they came, fought some, and went away. And for about 100 years, the British were living by themselves. But in 43 AD Anno Domini, no more BC from now on. In 43 AD, Cunobelinus' son, whose name was Adminius, quarreled with his father, was sent away from the kingdom, and went straight to Gallia, to Emperor Claudius, who replaced Caesar and other emperors of Rome. Adminius is one of the most famous traitors in British history. He persuaded Claudius, whom we know as Imperator Claudius, persuaded him to invade Britain. What Adminius wanted was just revenge on his father, on the people who made him an exile, which, as all of you I think understand, is not a very good thing. Сводить личные счеты, призывая вот внешних врагов в страну. So, somewhere between 40 and 43 AD, the exact date is not very clear, Emperor Claudius came to Great Britain with a great army. The king Cunobelinus had two other sons besides the traitor Adminius. Their names were Togodumnus, Того, не туго, Togodumnus, и есть вариант Togodubnus. Ну, как вы понимаете, из основ фонетики губные «б» и «м» могли перемешаться, поэтому по одному источнику он мог быть тогодумнусом, по другому тогодумнусом. So, Togodubnus and Caractacus were other sons of Cunobelinus. They hated their brother Adminius and they hated the Romans. So they ruled the southern part of the country after Cunobelinus' death and fought the Romans. In the 1st century AD, Claudius' invasion to Britain happened, and remember, though I said that two kings' sons were fighting the Rome, it doesn't mean, well, a big battle. In our scale, of course, в нашем масштабе. Here is the map of Britain in Caesar's time, in Caesar's and Claudius' time. I'll show it to you. You'll have a closer look. This is, just a minute, this is the place where Caesar landed when he came on his expeditions. Somewhere here, Claudius landed with his invasion. Cunobelinus and his sons Togodubnus and Caractac were fighting the Romans here. Here is the place of the tribe of Belgs, which means that the whole Britain was quite ready for invasion. Here you are. And in the 1st century AD, Britain became one of Roman colonies, dominions. It was called a province. Provincia. At first there were 2 provinces. By the 4th century there were 4 of them. I'll show you the map a little later. They were called Нижняя Британия, Верхняя Британия, Британия, ну как бы Максимова Британия, то есть императора Максима, и 4-я Британия, Британия Цезарианская. So Britain was considered as a Roman province, and there came to being such thing as client kings mentioned in your list. These client kings were Britons or Belgs. They had some power, but they were obliged with different treaties, связанными всяческими договорами, with the Romans. A client king can be translated as, ну скажем, король по назначению. Вот что-то в этом роде. They were appointed by the Romans, and if they were behaving, хорошо себя вели, if they were doing what they were told to do by the Romans backed them up, поддерживали, supported them. If not, there were conflicts. One of the first client kings was, for example, the queen whose name is Картимандуя или Картимандуа. Романизированное, конечно же, имя. So, Queen Картимандуя was the queen of the tribe of Brigands, племени бригантов. And she is another famous traitor, предательница, in British history, because after Caractacus was defeated by Claudius in one of the battles, he fled, сбежал. He fled to Картимандуя's kingdom, hoping for help and protection. Защита. But she gave him away to the Romans, and he, together with his family, was sent to Rome in chains. Nobody knows what happened to Caractac and his family in Rome. Were they put to the zoo? Were they killed on their way there? But Картимандуя became the symbol of treason and infidelity, unloyalty, верности, предательства. There was another rather nasty story concerning the client kings. So Картимандуя was a client queen. She was doing what the Rome told her to do. She was supported by Rome. The tribe of Iceni, у нас их называют племя Иценов. Try to find them on the map when you can. Had a king whose name was Прасутагус или Празутагус в интервокальном положении. Наверное, все-таки Прасутагус. He was a client king, And when he was dying, he divided his kingdom, quite a small one, strictly speaking, between the Romans and his two daughters. But after his death, his daughters' rights were ignored. And when his widow, вдова, Queen Boudica, tried to protest, a very nasty thing was done by the Romans, by the Roman governor, римским губернатором. The queen was publicly flogged. What's to flog? Ну, ее публично высекли. And her two daughters, who were just little girls at the time, were raped. Just as a punishment for all the others, as an example. Ну, как бы, чтобы это неповадно было. Well, we know quite a lot about Queen Boudica. She was a very tall woman with reddish hair, a very loud and strong voice, and of very strong character. So being so insulted, оскорбленной, and humiliated in front of her own subjects, перед собственными подданными, she was dreaming of revenge. What's the Russian for revenge? Here is a sculpture of King Boudica and her two daughters. I don't know what museum it is in. Have a closer look at it. And in Britain she's a symbol of unbending strength and patriotism, несгибаемый. Also, it's one of the most famous women in history. By the way, maybe you have heard her name already in the form of Боодицея. Так вот, по последним представлениям в науке, это чисто графическая ошибка. Представьте себе, да, Боодицея в конце C и A. Так вот, считается, что вторая буква И просто представляет собой второе C. Так что вот более точное ее написание, произошедшее, это Боудика, а не Боодицея, как привычно нам. I think we'll begin here now. So in 60 AD, Queen Boudica raised a revolt, восстание. It was a very bloody and cruel revolt, but I think we can understand her. Together with her subjects, с подданными, which included not only the tribe of Iceni, but also the other British people sympathizing with her, сочувствующих ей, she went first to the city that we now know as Colchester, which in the Roman time was Camulodunum. She burned the city. Almost all the Roman population of it was killed, many buildings were crashed, so the city was in ruins. Then she did the same in Londinium, тогдашняя форма Лондона, and in Verulamium, which we now call St. Albans. At least 3 cities were utterly ruined and all the Roman people there were killed. But of course this success, this triumph, couldn't last long. The Romans were much stronger and, they were better organized. So in the same 60 AD, Queen Boudica was defeated in a battle, and when she learned that 80,000 British people were killed, 80,000, she committed suicide. She took poison, becoming one of the martyrs in British history, мученицей. But of course, this revolt caused a reaction from the part of the Romans. As a reaction to this revolt, there happened another terrible event in British history. Another bloody page in British history was written this time by the Romans. They attacked the Isle of Anglesey. It's the modern name of it, Остров Anglesey. On the map it is, here it is, very close to the island, to the big island. At that time the island was called Mona, and according to Mara and Zimmer Bradley, it was the island of Druids. There was the Druidic temple, there were living the Druids and the women, the priestesses. It was a combination of a monastery, a school of doctors and warriors, and a how to put it, almost a political center. So in 60 AD, the island was attacked by the Romans, and I think that I'll read you a little extract from the same book describing this attack. Okay? Это пролог ко всему роману, поскольку все дальнейшие события и судьбы всех персонажей связаны вот с этим событием. Огненные языки факелов бесновались под порывами холодного ветра. Гневные блики пламени метались по черной воде и отражались в щитах легионеров, ожидавших сигнала к атаке на противоположном берегу пролива. От дымного смрада и тумана, поднимавшегося с моря, жрица закашлялась, а затем стала вслушиваться в речь римского военачальника, которую эхо доносилось с берега. Его слова звучали, как лязг доспехов. Легионеры слушали последнее напутствие перед штурмом. В ответ друиды запели, призывая кару небес. Воздух взорвался раскатами грома. Пение женщин-жриц превратилось в пронзительное завывание, и верховная жрица похолодела. Воздев к небу руки, раскачиваясь из стороны в сторону вместе с остальными жрицами, она посылала страшные проклятия на головы завоевателей. Темные накидки женщин развивались на ветру, словно крылья воронов. Из лагеря римлян тоже раздались истошные вопли, и первая линия воинов бросилась в воду. Боевая арфа друидов захлебывалась устрашающими звуками. У жрицы соднило в горле от пронзительного крика, но враги неумолимо приближались. Вот уже первый солдат в красном плаще ступил на берег священного острова. Боги не покарали его. Теперь хор поющих зазвучал нестройно. В свете факела блеснул меч римлянина, и один из друидов оттолкнул жрицу назад, пытаясь заслонить ее своим телом. Римлянин с размаху опустил клинок, и темное одеяние женщины окрасилось кровью. Песнопения сменились визгом и воплями. Жрица бросилась к лесу. Друиды падали под мечами римлян, словно скошенные колосья. Очень скоро легионеры перебили их, и красная волна хлынула вглубь острова. Жрица, спотыкаясь и падая, бежала по лесу, в отчаянии всматриваясь в просветы между стволами деревьев, пытаясь отыскать священные круглые курганы. Над домом женщин поднялось оранжевое зарево, впереди замаячили каменные столбы. Позади себя она услышала крики на чужом языке. Понимая, что спрятаться негде, она вбежала в проем между столбами и всем телом прижалась к алтарному камню. Сейчас ее убьют. Она призвала на помощь великую богиню, затем выпрямилась и приготовилась принять смерть. Но ей не суждено было погибнуть от стального клинка. Грубые руки схватили жрицу и стали срывать одежду. Она сопротивлялась как могла, ее бросили на камень, и она ощутила на себе тяжесть тела первого насильника. Спасения ждать было неоткуда, оставалось только одно – заставить сознание, приученное к священной дисциплине, на время покинуть это тело, пока его не перестанут терзать. Но, погружаясь в небытие, она все же успела выкрикнуть: «Великая царица воронов, отомсти за меня!» There are evidences in historical sources that on the island of Mona, all the druids, the men, were killed by the Romans, and all the women from 8 to 80, that is from young girls to small girls to old women, were raped, and most of them were killed by the Romans. It is said that the children that were born after that were divided. All the girls were killed as as symbols of shame and grief. And as to the boys, they were brought up by the druids, to avenge to the Rome. They were brought up with a hatred to the Rome. The Romans were their fathers. That's what the book about. After these two terrible events, the revolt of Boudica and the attack of the island of Mona, both sides were shocked and terrified. Too much blood was spilled. And strange as it may sound, after that, a relatively peaceful period began. The shock of all this blood was too great for both sides. They had to live there together. They had to get along somehow. Как-то уживаться. And the period that came next was called Pax Romana, Римский мир, Pax Romana. It lasted for about 3 centuries. Of course, this peace was only a relatively peaceful period. The Roman soldiers protected Britain from the external enemies, от внешнего врага, so no more warlike tribes were coming from the continent, and the national resistance, национальное сопротивление, was almost crushed, almost but not entirely. The Picts were called the most serious northern enemies of Roman Empire. Те самые пикты, о которых мы говорили. As to the Picts, well, literally, that means the painted ones, раскрашенные. They appeared first in literary sources at the end of the 3rd century AD. They were mentioned in some Roman chronicles, в римских хронологиях. They were called the principal northern enemies of Roman Britain, римской Британии. They were living in Caledonia, which we now know as Scotland. So try to remember, when Caledonia is mentioned, that means Scotland. Так что вот в теперешней Шотландии, тогдашней Каледонии, жили пикты. Если бы вы меня спросили, где в то время жили скотты, я бы вам сказала, в Ирландии. Скотты в Ирландии, пикты в Шотландии. Which was called Caledonia. All the emperors, all the Roman emperors who were ruling Britain as one of Roman provinces were fighting against the Picts. The Picts made attacks and fled, and made attacks and fled again, but the Romans didn't know a moment of rest with them. That's what is called an internal enemy, такой вот внутренний враг, постоянный. And Rudyard Kipling, who wrote not only about India, but was also deeply interested in the history of his own country, wrote a little, well, series or a cycle of poems devoted to the history of Britain. I think, if I have time, I think I will. I'll read you 2 of his poems in translation, if you don't mind. If anybody is interested, I have the English texts of these poems, and when you know what's it about, it's easier to read it. So if you are interested, I can give you the text. The first poem I'd like to read to you is about the Picts. It's a small one. It's called «Песня пиктов». The only thing that I mustn't forget is, well, you have all seen the map. You remember the outline of Britain at the time. I think you have seen the такие вот зубчатые линии на границе Шотландии и Англии. These are the walls. The first of them is Hadrian Wall, Adrianov Wall. The second, the later one, Antonine Wall, Вал Антония, Антониев Wall. I'll tell you a little more about them, but when стена is mentioned here, that is one of these walls. So, «Песня пиктов», Rudyard Kipling. Рим не хочет взглянуть, роняя тяжесть копыт на голову нам и на грудь. Наш крик для него молчит. Часовые идут, раз, два, а мы из-за медных плечей жужжим, как отбить нам вал с языками против мечей. Мы очень малы, видит Бог, малы для добра и зла, но только дайте нам срок, мы сточим державу дотла. Мы червь, что гложет ваш ствол, мы гниль, что корни гноит, мы шип, что в стопу вошел, мы яд, что в крови горит. Души томила дуб, моль дырявит тряпье, трет путы крысиный зуб, каждому дело свое. Мы мелкая тварь берлог, нам тоже работать не лень. Что точится под шумок, то вскроется в должный день. Мы слабы, но будет знак всем ордам за вашей стеной. Мы их соберем в кулак, чтоб рухнуть на вас войной. Неволя нас не смутит, нам век вековать в рабах. Но когда вас задушит стыд, мы спляшем на ваших гробах. Мы очень малы, видит Бог, малы для добра и зла. Но только дайте нам срок, мы сточим державу дотла. Мы червь, что гложет ваш ствол. Мы гниль, что корень гноит. Мы шип, что в стопу вошел. Мы яд, что в крови горит. Так что жизнь римских наместников в Англии, в Британии спокойно назвать никак нельзя. That was a constant threat from the north, постоянная угроза с севера. As to these walls, these are the famous Roman walls, знаменитые римские валы. Hadrian's Wall was begun to be built at 121 AD, 121 нашего нашей эры. After Hadrian's visit to Britain, he was living in Rome mostly, but after his visit to Britain he got so impressed with the stories about Picts' attacks that he ordered a wall to be built. The length of the wall is not very big, it's about 73 miles. Вот как раз этот перешеек, разделяющий Шотландию и Британию. It is stretched from shore to shore, and each mile there was a little fort. But still, with all these 73 forts, the wall was taken and destroyed by the Picts in 368. Then the Romans took it back. It was destroyed again in 383, and they were coming and going, the Picts, I mean. The same with the Antonine Wall. It was even shorter. It was made as a barrier between the barbaric Picts and more or less civilized Britain, which we now call Roman Britain. That was самая Римская Британия. Speaking about Pax Romana, that is Roman peace, I can say that at that time, with these relatively peaceful times, the trades. Any questions? Any questions? Okay. The trades, the trade, the building, the crafts were flourishing, процветали. As to the trade, the constant trade was carried on with other countries. First of all with Rome, of course, with France, well, mostly with Rome and France. Also, different parts of Britain were trading between themselves. From what could Britain export? They were exporting corn, which is corn, зерно, iron, tin, remember tin islands, and lead, which is свинец. And as to lead, it was imported in so-called lead pigs, так называемых свинцовых свинках. These were very heavy bars of lead. Their weight was from 170 pounds to 190 pounds. Поделите на сколько? На 2,5 и получите, сколько это было в килограммах. And what makes these lead pigs historical evidences is that there were inscriptions on them, надписи, the name of the master who formed this bar of lead, the date, and usually the place where it was made. Most of lead was coming from so-called Mendip's mine, Mendipские рудники. So lead was exported in pigs. Also, British tiles, плитка, ну вот предок нашего кафеля, was very popular in Europe. It was brought to Rome, to Gaul, which is France, and even to other parts of Italy, such as Venice. Представляете, да, чтобы вот импортировать эту плитку, экспортировать, простите, Венецию, нужно, чтобы товар был достаточно хорошим. As to Britain's import, they imported mostly items of luxury, предметы роскоши, pottery, decorations, and metalware, различные предметы из металла. All these things can be found in villas, in the ruins of Roman villas. There were about 600 of these villas left in all Britain. And I'll ask you to read at home quite a small text, a little more than a page, describing such a villa. I'll give you the books by Bell. The villas were very comfortable dwelling places, жилища. They had sort of a central heating, центральное отопление. Under the floors there were flues, трубы, with heated water, so it was warm. The floors were not ground, but stone, and usually they were tiled, выложены плиткой. Well, the ceilings were rather high, высокие потолки, the windows were big, so these villas were, well, I think, quite suitable to live in. Many things were found there, decorations, dishes, посуда. Of course, clothes couldn't remain intact, but a lot of makeup was found. What's the word for makeup? Косметика. They were found jars of rouge, склянки с румянами, different manicure sets, всяческие маникюрные наборы, different, skin scratches. Вот, да, всякие лопатки, чтобы вот эпителий отмерший снимать. So they took good care of themselves, of their skin, hands, nails. Their women were wearing makeup. But you read about Roman villas yourselves. So Roman walls, Roman villas. What comes next? Roman roads, of course. The signs of Roman civilization. Вот те знаки римской цивилизации, о которых во всех учебниках говорится. Well, Roman roads were the first straight and solid, прямые крепкие roads in Britain. Their purpose was mostly military ones. They were made for the legends, so that the legends could be very quickly sent to the places where they were needed. If there was a revolt in some place, even there near the wall, it took the legends much less time to walk there on a good road than finding their way in swamps and forests. Ну, согласитесь, что по твердой дороге идти гораздо быстрее и удобнее, чем пробираться по лесам и болотам. The technology of Roman roads is still very valuable. I'm afraid that they were much better than some of our St. Petersburg roads now, because they were made in layers. В этих дорогах они, как бы сказать, они строились слоями. They were made of mortar, gravel, lime, sand and stones. То есть там использовались, гравий, камни покрупнее, плотно пригнанные друг к другу, и промежутки были заполнены гравием. Все это скреплялось известью и чем-то вроде цемента. We can't call it cement, it's a modern material, but mortar is something like that. There were several layers in each road, so a legion with, horses and different всякими там осадными машинами could walk along this road, several hundred people, and the road was still good for use. That's why these roads can still be found in Britain. The next thing left to us by the Romans, of course, are Roman towns. The most important cities of modern Britain are Roman by origin. Well, the first of them was so-called Eboracum. Eboracum, the modern York. Значит, теперешний Йорк в римские времена назывался Эборакум и был штаб-квартирой 9-го легиона. То, собственно, это военное поселение, военный городок. Теперешний Глостер назывался Глевум. Теперешний Честер имел название Дева. Никаких романтических ассоциаций с девой нет, просто римское слово Devar. Don't remember what it means. Дева это Честер. Про Колчестер, который назывался Камулодунум. И Лондон, который назывался в те времена Лондиниум, мы уже говорили. Кроме того, Веруланиум, вот тот самый город, который разрушила королева Боудика в своем мстительном марше, это современный Сент-Олбанс. Кстати, до святого Олбанса мы тоже доберемся довольно скоро. Святого, по имени которого был назван город. И еще один город, о котором я скажу чуть-чуть позже, это город Бат. В английском написании Бас. В римские времена он назывался Аква Сулис. Есть у вас это название в списке? Есть? Аква Сулис. Аква Сулис, он же Бат. Well, in the towns there were first barracks, казармы, because these were all military towns. Temples, храмы, basilicas, public offices, всевозможные государственные учреждения, and of course private houses and villas. As to Roman words in English, I haven't yet seen your quizzes. Еще не смотрела ваши квизы, посмотрю их нынче вечером. Но я просто не сомневаюсь, что среди языков, оказавших влияние на английский, латынь фигурировала. Была? Ну, это хорошо. Какие латинские заимствования в английском вы сейчас вот так вот можете припомнить? Ну, вот это вот скорее греческое, вот все эти логии. Ну, например, street, ведь идет от латинского strata. Ровная, прямая, то бишь улица. Угу. Запишите несколько соответствий. Уверяю вас, это вам всегда пригодится, когда вы будете долго-долго объяснять, почему street, почему wall. Можно будет сослаться на латынь. Неважно, если ваша аудитория не владеет латынью вот, в полной мере. Ассоциации всегда сработают на вас. Связи между двумя языками, даже если о них обоих самое приблизительное представление, они помогают. Итак, strata дало нам street. Английское wall идет от латинского volume, double L. Латинское portus дало порт, естественно, port. Я думаю, что вы много раз слышали про латинское castra, лагерь, которое в английском существует в двух видах. Либо casta, там Lancaster, да? Либо Chester. То есть все города, в состав которых входит на последнем месте элемент Chester, это бывшие римские лагеря, места, где они разбивали лагерь. Итак, Честер, Манчестер, кстати, Глостер, который пишется это в общем Глосестер, что там еще, Рочестер, все это от Кастра лагерь. Город Колчестер, который я уже упоминала, все его название значащее. Кол – это от колонии, Честер – это от Кастра. То есть колониальный лагерь, лагерь в колонии, Колчестер. Угу. Ну и, наконец, мы добрались вот до того самого бата, который аква сулис. Что такое аква? Угу. А сулис, если я только не ошибаюсь, сладкое, sweet. Well, here is the picture of the town of Bath. The panoramic view of Bath. It's a very famous resort or spa. Spa, курорт. The most important thing in Bath is its hot water springs, горячие источники. There is a legend that in ancient times, even before Romans, one king had a son whose name was Bloodud. And this son, when a young man got very unlucky, he contracted leprosy. What's leprosy? Проказа. Помните, лепрозорий, да? Leprosy, проказа. He was ill with leprosy. So, of course, he was sent away from his father's court. А теперь вспоминаем сказку про принцессу и свинопаса. He became the swineherd. He was looking after a herd of swine or pigs. Living all alone with his pigs. One day, he noticed that, well, of course, his pigs were having skin diseases. Всякие нормальные свинячьи кожные болезни. One day, he noticed that his pigs were getting better and better. That their pink pigs' skins were getting cleaner and cleaner. He began to look after them closely, and he found out that they were splashing and bathing in some puddles. He touched the water in these puddles, в лужах, and felt that it was rather hot. Then he followed the example and began taking baths in these hot puddles, that is, in these hot water springs himself. Well, the legend doesn't tell us how soon, but rather soon he got entirely recovered. There were no signs of leprosy on his skin. He came back to his father's court and he was accepted there. Там приняли. After his father's death, he became a king. So, as the legend says, it was he who ordered to make a resort, a spa, at the town of Bath. But of course, before the Roman times, it was just people coming to the springs, bathing there, and leaving the place in hope of recovery. Надеясь на выздоровление. The Romans, being rather civilized people, make it a civilized spa. That's how the excavation of Roman baths, look, here it is. Well, almost all excavation look the same, практически у всех раскопок вид одинаковый. But I'll show you the reconstruction of Roman baths. Just a minute. Вот предположительно так выглядели римские бани в те времена, о которых мы сейчас с вами говорим. Just a minute. Excuse me. Sorry. Here it is. Итак, вот она, реконструкция. Давайте покажу обе сразу. Реконструкция римских бань. Would you like to visit such a place? Even with no skin diseases, I hope we would all enjoy it. Only a friend of mine who went there to Bath and was taken to all these places, she was given a glass of water, and she told me that it smelled terribly and it was greenish. But she had to drink part of this glass of water, and she was told that, well, she'll be always healthy. She told me it was a terrible experience. Greenish, hot water to drink. Well, here it is. Bath was called Aqua Sulis, как бы город вот сладкой целебной воды. And here we come to, I think, to the last question that we are going to discuss today. I told you about Roman roads, Roman walls, Roman towns, Roman villas. It's a question of religion. Well, it seems to me that, пожалуйста, it seems to me that you are getting a little restless. For the last 10 minutes, would you like me to speak Russian? Хотите, на последние 10 минут перейду на русский? Что-то вы уже начинаете, по-моему. Кое-что пропускать просто мимо ушей. Итак. Да, простите, последнее, что касается бата. Вот откуда идет название той самой ванны, в которую мы погружаемся. Изначально от имени принца по имени Бладуд. Бладуд, Bath, Bat. Так что, когда будете учить детишек, то рассказывайте им эту историю. Андерсона читали, в общем, все, вроде бы. Итак, вот это вот постоянное параллельное сосуществование британских, скажем так, и римских названий – это красноречивое свидетельство того, о чем почему-то не принято говорить вот в наших книжках по истории Римской Британии, и что всегда с благодарностью упоминают исследователи-англичане. Римляне, несмотря вот на то, что они все вслед за Клавдием были как бы завоевателями, помните, да, Roman Invasion, тема нашей нынешней лекции, собственно, наша вторая лекция так могла бы называться Roman Britain, Римская Британия. Они оказались удивительно терпимы в вопросах веры. Да, в общем-то, это естественно. Когда Римская империя стала распространяться во все стороны, по всей Европе, то римляне не только приходили и завоевывали, но и оставались жить на завоеванных территориях. И очень быстро они начали понимать, что невозможно жить среди завоеванного народа и никак с ним не смешиваться. Что вот эта вот практика сепаратизма, она себя не оправдывает. Тем более в таком тонком деле, как религия. Они очень быстро поняли, что постоянные разборки, чьи боги лучше, местные или принесенные завоевателями, к добру не приведут. И вот тот разгром, который учинили римляне на острове Мона, это, как ни странно, печальное исключение, а отнюдь не правило. Римляне были очень терпимы. Как вы помните, римляне сами были, в общем-то, язычники. У них был целый огромный сон богов. Обычно можно установить какие-то параллели между греческими богами и римскими. Ну, вот верховный бог у греков Зевс, у римлян Юпитер, богиня мудрости римская Минерва, богиня любви Венера, она же греческая Афродита, бог войны Марс, ну и так далее. Так вот, римляне приносили с собой своих богов, воздвигали им храмы. Я говорила о том, что в каждом римском городе вместе с казармами, естественно, начинали строить и храмы, но относились очень спокойно к тому, что местные жители продолжали поклоняться своим богам. Налет на остров Мона, или Англси, был вызван не религиозными причинами, а политическими. Вот вы бунтуете, так вот же вам. Вот у вас Баудика, а мы разгромим ваш священный остров. Но после этого в течение 3-4 веков, пока не пришел конец Римской Британии, сосуществовали римское язычество, такое вот почти светское язычество, когда у каждого бога были свои совершенно конкретные характеристики, свой человеческий характер, свои слабости и вполне конкретная область, в которой вот он как бы отвечал за порядок. Марс был богом войны, Минерва – богиня образования, ну и так далее. Так вот, существовали римские боги и местные боги, кельтские. Вот все в той же книге «Лесная обитель» дается некий список кельтских богов, которым, если вот верить автору, а я думаю, что она прочла достаточное количество специальной литературы, на которой мы можем основываться. Ну, например, кельты во главе с друидами поклонялись богу по имени Танар. Это был бог грома, соответствует какому римскому богу? Юпитеру, естественно. Был у них, скажем, бог по имени Рогатый, бог олень. Естественно, покровитель животных и племен, живших в лесу. Вот, скажем, была та самая царица воронов, которую взывает жрица в отрывке, который я читала, Катубодва. Царица воронов, мести и войны. Была очень поэтическая богиня Арианрод, богиня серебряной колесницы, богиня луны, богиня девственности. Вот. Была богиня Дон или Дану, мифическая прародительница всех богов. Кстати, вот обратите внимание, скажем, у греков ведь прародитель богов – это Крон. Почти всегда боги ведут свой род от мужчины. Я вам говорила про остатки матриархата у кельтов, прародительница богов женского рода. Так вот, сначала она считалась прародительницей богов, потом и племена британские начали считать, что они ведут свой род от нее. Поэтому общее такое вот описательное выражение, касающееся всех племен, это дети Дану, то есть британцы. Кроме того, конечно же, были у них многие безымянные боги, духи лесов, вод, источников, деревьев, нечто соответствующее греческим наядам, дриадам и остальным. Были личные боги разных племен. Скажем, умерший вождь, если он сделал для племени что-то хорошее, очень быстро и без всяких сложных процедур, которыми это сопровождалось позже, канонизировался, становился богом. Так что вот были боги-предки. Ну вот были те, которых я вам перечислила. Так вот, римляне сделали крайне разумную вещь. Обнаружив вот эти неизбежные схождения в системах религиозных, они просто стали ассоциировать местного бога со своим. Как бы все равно, как он называется. Называйте его Танар, пожалуйста, мы его называем Юпитер. Так вот, богиня, которая считалась покровительницей города Бата, они ассоциировали ее просто-напросто с Минервой. Имя этой богини Сулис. Они сопоставили некоторые характеристики и решили, что это их богиня Минерва, просто под другим местным именем. Поэтому Минерва всегда считалась вот покровительницей Бата. Она же Сулис. То же самое произошло и с Марсом. Не припомню сейчас, честно говоря, как зовут бога войны, но Катубодва осталась кельтской богиней, видимо, в силу крайней своей мстительности и несговорчивости. Но какое-то соответствие Марсу они нашли. То же самое потом делали и скандинавы, о которых мы будем с вами говорить. Они находили соответствие своей мифологии с британской, которая уже была смесью исконно кельтской и римской. Вау. И последнее, о чем, пожалуй, нужно сказать. Ах да, вот с римским язычеством, с кельтскими богами, в том числе из друидического календаря, существовало раннее христианство. И опять-таки в Риме христиан бросали львам, там, замуровывали в стенах и прочее с ними проделывали. Если верить свидетельству Мариан Брэдли, в Великобритании проповедь христианства находила вполне благодарный отклик как среди просвещенных римлян, так и среди диких язычников кельтов. Просто сама легенда христианства была настолько привлекательна и настолько гуманна по сравнению с культами очень многих других богов, что вот к ней как-то тянулись. И одна из героинь, жена вот этого вот римлянина, Гая, Юлия, от всяких несчастий своей личной жизни ищет и действительно находит убежище в христианстве. О христианизации Британии, о приходе христианства туда, мы будем говорить несколько позже, в следующей лекции, когда речь пойдет об англосаксонской Британии. Но первые святые и первые христианские мученики начали появляться вот тогда, в III-IV веке нашей эры. Да, вот посмотрите, пожалуйста, это карта провинций, римских провинций в Британии, вот те самые 4 провинции, о которых я вам говорила, с их столицами. Потому что и Йорк, Эборакум был столицей, и Колчестер, и Веруланум также. От 1 до 4 века. Да, и простите, пожалуйста, прежде чем говорить о святых и мучениках, взгляните вот сюда. Вот это вот детали убранства города Бата. Это Горгона, явно персонаж из античной мифологии, скорее даже греческой, заимствованной у греков римлянами. Ну, собственно, прочтите сами подпись. Картинки, вот это то, как выглядел Бат сверху во времена римского владычества. То есть это не только бани, но и вот весь тот комплекс зданий и служб, которые полагаются нормальному курорту. И взгляните, пожалуйста, вот сюда. Во-первых, вот это вот изображение такого тройственного женского божества, римское их название матрес тампестрес. То есть как бы вот 3 матери. Божество изначально кельтское, но римляне довольно быстро примирились с ним, назвали его по-своему и терпели это изображение вот в том же Бате, в тех же римских банях. Вот это вот, секунду, типично римская, бронзовая, не ошибаюсь, статуэтка Меркурия. Меркурий, помните, посланник богов, такой вот бог торговли, плутовства. А вот дальше идет британский вариант того же бога. Статуэтка та же самая, несколько более примитивная. Но вот эта вот фигурка, она несет черты национального своеобразия. Это нечто среднее между римским каноном изображения Меркурия и вполне реальным, исторически проверенным обликом тогдашнего британца. Посмотрите. Вот так вот сосуществовали две системы религиозные, 2 культа. Кроме того, поскольку римляне все-таки были люди довольно подвижные, среди римских солдат были поклонники и Диониса, и Изиды, и Митры, такой чисто мужской культ торговцев и воинов. И все эти храмы соседствовали друг с другом в римских городах. Ну, соответственно, в лесах находились святилища друидов. Что касается святых, то первые святые, первые посланники Рима в Британию, это были святой Патрик, который примерно в V веке нашей эры начал обращать в христианство Ирландию и стал ее святым покровителем Сент-Патрик. Точную дату его приезда установить не удалось, считается, что это примерно 432 год нашей эры. Сотни лет позже, в 547 году, Сент-Дэвид, святой Дэвид, христианизировал какую часть Британии? Ну, чем покровителем он является, вспоминайте. Уэльс. Сент-Дэвид – покровитель Уэльса, Сент-Патрик – покровитель Ирландии, святой Георг – покровитель Британии, да, и святой Андрей – Шотландии. Итак, наиболее отдаленные, как это ни странно, и дикие части Британии были христианизированы раньше, чем Британия центральная, Ирландия и Уэльс. Кроме того, упоминается такой святой Германус, который приехал в Британию из Рима примерно в 429 году и знаменит тем, что, как считается, научил тогда уже британские племена, они вели битвы с англосаксами, тема следующей лекции. Так вот, он научил бритов побеждать в битвах. Знаете, каким образом? Он их научил, идя в битву, кричать «Халлелуя!» «Аллилуйя!» Это имело потрясающий успех, то есть, их дикие языческие противники, видимо, так пугались вот этого во много глоток вопля, что действительно обращались в бегство. Так что святой Германус считался очень полезным человеком, его всегда брали с собой в битву. Кроме того, был святой Брэндон, который, если верить легендам, исследовал северную часть Атлантического океана и, как говорят, открыл Северную Америку. Он плыл в огромной, совершенно круглой, сделанной в основном из кожи лодке. Я не знаю, как они управляли вот этой вот круглой плоской лодкой, но, судя по описаниям, которые он привез с собой, земля, до которой он доплыл, действительно была Северной Америкой. Так что вопрос о том, кто был первым, Колумб, Америго Веспуччи или кто-то еще, остается открытым. Вернувшись обратно в Англию, он основал монастырь на острове Тирей в Гибридских островах. Первыми мучениками стали святой Олбан, как мы его называем, потому что и город мы называем Сент-Албан. И, если не ошибаюсь, святой Германус тоже, но точно об их судьбе сказать вам не могу. Well, that was the period of so-called Pax Romana. But closer to the end of this period, the end of the 4th century AD, the Romans had some troubles back at home. The Roman Empire began rather shaky, unstable. As it is said in in Gibbon's Decline and Fall of Roman Empire, вот этот знаменитый труд «Закат и падение», если не ошибаюсь, Римской империи. The enormous number of slaves were not interested in products of their labor, so they presented a great danger to the empire. At the end of the 4th century, when Germanic tribes invaded the Western Roman Empire, the slaves who hated the Romans gladly joined them by thousands. So in 407 AD, the Roman legions were recalled from Britain. Римские легионы были отозваны. They were recalled to defend the central provinces of the Roman Empire from the attacks of the barbarian tribes. And the Celts were left alone on the islands. Британские легионы были отозваны, и кельты остались одни. И закончить нынче я хотела бы, случится это ровно через 2 минуты, еще одним стихотворением Киплинга, посвященным вот как раз этому периоду. Ладно? Есть у нас еще 2 минуты? Не более. Называется оно «Песни римского центуриона». Если кто-то захочет, потом могу дать английский текст. Если хотите, то посмотрите, кого заинтересует. Итак, песни римского центуриона, примерно 300-й год нашей эры. Легат. Я получил приказ идти с когорты в Рим, по морю к порту Итию, а там путем сухим. Отряд мой отправление ждет, зайдя на корабли. Но пусть другой мой меч возьмет. Остаться мне вели. Я прослужил здесь 40 лет, все 40 воевал. Я видел и скалистый Вект, и Адрианов вал. Мне все места знакомы тут. Но лишь узнав о том, что в Рим домой нас всех зовут, я понял, здесь мой дом. Здесь счастлив был я в старину, здесь имя заслужил, здесь сына и жену я в землю положил. Здесь годы, память, пот и труд, любовь и боль утрат вросли навек в британский грунт. Как вырвать их, легат? Я здесь не полюбил народ, равнины и леса, но лучше южный небосвод, чем наши небеса, где августа жемчужный свет, и мгла январских бурь, и клочья туч, и марта луч сквозь бледную лазурь. Вдоль Родонуса вам идти, где зреет виноград, и клонит лозы бриз.